When I was a child, the elders in my village would often tell us terrifying stories about the Strzyga. It wasn't just a bedtime tale meant to keep us in line. It was something they genuinely feared. They described it as a creature with massive, leathery wings and claws sharp enough to tear through flesh. Its glowing red eyes were said to pierce the darkness, and its voice, well, no one who heard its chilling screech had ever lived to tell the tale. The Strzyga was more than a monster in a story. It was a warning. They said it came out only on nights of the full moon, hunting for both animals and humans. Some claimed it was the restless spirit of someone cursed in life, doomed to roam and feed on the living. Others swore it was born of pure evil, a creature that thrived on fear and blood. I remember sitting by the fire, the flickering light casting shadows on the walls, as my grandmother recounted these tales. Her voice would drop to a whisper when she got to the part about the attacks. "Never walk alone at night," she would say, her eyes narrowing as if daring me to challenge her wisdom. "And if you hear wings in the dark, don't look up. Run." Of course, as a kid, I thought it was just folklore, something to keep us close to home. But as I grew older, I realized the fear in their eyes when they spoke about it wasn't fake. Villagers would avoid the woods entirely during the full moon, locking their doors and lighting candles to ward off evil. There were too many unexplained disappearances, too many mutilated animals found at dawn, their bodies drained of blood. I dismissed it all as superstition, a relic of an old-world mindset. That is, until Lukasz disappeared. His story became the kind of nightmare that haunted our village long after his screams had faded into the night. Even now, as I recount this, I can feel the weight of those tales pressing down on me, like a shadow I can't escape. Back then, I didn't believe in the Strzyga, but that was before I knew the truth. It was a warm summer evening, the kind that makes you forget the world can be cruel. Lukasz and I had been at a festival in the nearby town. The air was alive with laughter, music, and the sweet smell of roasted meats. For a few hours, we were free from the weight of the village's fears and the dark legends that lurked in its shadows. When the night wore on, the moon rose high in the sky, a full moon, bright and unyielding. I remember glancing at it, its pale light spilling over the fields like a silvery blanket. It was beautiful, serene even, but the unease it brought back was undeniable. "Come on, it's just a story," Lukasz said, slapping me on the back as we started to walk home. He was always the braver of the two of us, or maybe just more reckless. "You don't actually believe in that old nonsense, do you?" I laughed, but it was forced. "Of course not," I lied. Deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The road back to the village was long and bordered by dense forest on either side. The trees loomed over us, their gnarled branches twisting into shapes that looked disturbingly like claws. The sounds of the festival faded behind us, replaced by the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Then we heard it, a sound that froze me in place, a distant flapping, like massive wings slicing through the air. Lukasz stopped walking and tilted his head toward the noise. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice no longer laced with bravado. I didn't answer. My grandmother's words rang in my ears. "If you hear wings in the dark, don't look up. Run." But my legs felt like lead, and my gaze betrayed me. Above us, silhouetted against the glowing moon, was something enormous. At first, it seemed like a bird, but as it swooped lower, its grotesque form became clear. Its wings were tattered, its body gaunt, and its eyes, oh, its eyes. They glowed a sickening red, locking onto us with an intelligence that was undeniably predatory. "Run!" I screamed, shoving Lukasz forward. We sprinted down the dirt path, the pounding of our feet drowned out by the deafening beat of wings closing in. The creature let out a blood-curdling screech, a sound so unnatural that it felt like it tore through my very soul. I dared not look back, but I could hear it gaining on us. Lukasz was slightly ahead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Don't stop!" I yelled, but it was too late. The Strzyga struck with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air and catching Lukasz by the shoulder. He cried out in pain, stumbling as the creature descended upon him. I froze, torn between helping my friend and saving myself. What I saw next would haunt me forever. I stood there, paralyzed by fear, watching as the Strzyga pinned Lukasz to the ground, its wings unfurled, casting monstrous shadows in the moonlight. Up close, it was even more horrifying than I had imagined. Its skin was ashen and stretched taut over bones, its face a twisted combination of human and beast. The red glow of its eyes burned into the darkness, and its jagged teeth glistened as it bared them at its prey. Lukasz thrashed and screamed, his voice raw with terror, but the creature was impossibly strong. It leaned closer to him, its breath coming out in harsh, guttural rasps. I could hear Lukasz pleading, begging for his life, but his words were swallowed by the oppressive stillness of the night. I don't know what came over me, but something inside me snapped. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice trembling but loud enough to draw the creature's attention. The Strzyga's head snapped toward me, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. It tilted its head, as if studying me, and in that moment, I knew I had made a mistake. The air seemed to grow heavier, and a chilling dread washed over me. But Lukasz seized the opportunity. With the creature momentarily distracted, he managed to shove its clawed hand off his chest and scramble backward. He was bleeding heavily, his shirt torn and stained with crimson, but he was alive. "Run!" he shouted at me, his voice strained but resolute. Before I could process his words, he grabbed a large rock from the ground and hurled it at the Strzyga. The impact barely fazed the creature, but it was enough to redirect its rage. With an unearthly screech, it turned back to him, its wings spreading wide as it prepared to strike again. This time, I didn't freeze. I ran, my legs moving faster than they ever had before. The path ahead was a blur, the shadows of the trees merging into a suffocating tunnel. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of the struggle, the growls of the Strzyga, Lukasz's defiant shouts, and then a terrible, heart-stopping silence. I wanted to turn back, to help him, but fear drove me forward. My chest burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop until the lights of the village came into view. When I finally stumbled into the main square, my knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the cobblestones. A few villagers rushed to my side, their faces etched with concern, but all I could do was point back toward the woods. "It's real," I gasped, my voice barely audible. "The Strzyga, it's real." The crowd murmured in confusion and fear, but I couldn't explain further. My mind was consumed by a single, horrifying question. Had Lukasz made it out alive? The village awoke to chaos. The news of my frantic arrival and my incoherent warnings about the Strzyga spread quickly. By dawn, a group of villagers had gathered, armed with makeshift weapons, pitchforks, axes, and torches. Despite their fear, they were determined to search the woods and uncover the truth. I insisted on joining them. Even though my legs trembled with every step, I couldn't abandon Lukasz, not when there was still a sliver of hope that he had survived. The elders tried to dissuade me, but I was resolute. The forest was eerily silent as we ventured in, the usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves absent. The weight of the night's events lingered, and the air seemed heavy with an unspoken dread. Every shadow felt alive, every snapping twig sent our hearts racing. It didn't take long to find the site of the struggle. Blood stained the earth, and the ground was churned with deep claw marks. The villagers murmured uneasily, their bravado faltering as they took in the scene. "Over here," one of them called, his voice shaky. We followed him to a small clearing, and my stomach dropped at the sight. A piece of Lukasz's torn shirt hung from a low branch, and nearby, we found his shoe, stained with blood. But there was no sign of Lukasz himself or the Strzyga. It dragged him away, one of the older men muttered, gripping his axe tightly. We shouldn't have doubted the stories. The group debated what to do next. Some wanted to press on, to confront the creature and put an end to the terror that had haunted our village for generations. Others, myself included, weren't so sure. Facing the Strzyga felt like walking into certain death. But before we could make a decision, a chilling sound pierced the air. It was a low, guttural growl, followed by a faint rustling in the underbrush. We froze, our eyes darting toward the sound. The growl grew louder, closer. Then, from the shadows, we saw them. Two glowing red eyes, burning like embers in the dark. "Run!" someone shouted, but the warning came too late. The Strzyga burst from the underbrush, its massive wings unfurling as it let out a deafening screech. It was even more horrifying in the light of day, its ashen skin glistening and its claws glinting like blades. Chaos erupted. Villagers screamed and scattered, their torches and weapons falling to the ground in their panic. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. The Strzyga's eyes locked onto me, and I knew I was its next target. Just as it lunged, a figure stepped between us. It was one of the villagers, an older man with a determined expression. He swung his axe with all his strength, striking the creature's wing. The Strzyga howled in pain, momentarily stunned, and the man shouted for me to run. This time, I didn't hesitate. I sprinted back toward the village, my heart pounding and my mind racing. Behind me, the sounds of the struggle faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. When I reached the edge of the forest, I turned back, hoping to see the villagers emerging victorious. But no one came. The woods stood silent and foreboding, swallowing them whole. The villagers who had entered the forest with me never returned. I waited at the edge of the trees until the sun dipped low in the sky, my hope dwindling with the light. Finally, I stumbled back into the village, my heart heavy with guilt and dread. The elders gathered in the square, their faces pale as I recounted the events in fragmented sentences. When I described the Strzyga's attack and the courage of the man who saved me, they fell into a heavy silence. They knew the risks. One of the elders finally said, his voice trembling, "The stories have always warned us. The Strzyga is not something we can fight." The village fell into mourning that night, but it was a quiet, stifled grief. People locked their doors and bolted their windows, afraid to speak the creature's name aloud. I stayed in my home, staring at the candlelight flickering against the walls, unable to sleep. Days passed, and the forest grew eerily quiet. The usual hum of wildlife seemed to vanish, as if even nature itself was retreating from the Strzyga's wrath. Rumors began to spread, whispers of shadows flitting past windows, of guttural growls heard in the dead of night. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind set my nerves on edge. I barely ate, barely slept. Guilt gnawed at me. I had escaped, but at what cost? One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard it, a faint tapping at my window, slow and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare move, didn't dare look. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Then came a voice, low, raspy, and hauntingly familiar. "Run if you can." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. My eyes darted to the window, but all I could see was darkness. The voice sent chills down my spine, and I knew it wasn't my imagination. The Strzyga hadn't forgotten me. It was toying with me, letting me know it was still there, still watching. The village never truly recovered. People began to leave, abandoning their homes and fields in search of safer places. By the end of the month, only a handful of us remained, too stubborn or too fearful to flee. As for me, I've stopped going into the forest. I don't even look at it anymore, but I still hear the tapping at my window some nights, and I know it's only a matter of time. The Strzyga isn't done with me, and when it comes, I won't be able to run.